Joining us now, well, maybe soon to be 2016 presidential candidate is the former governor of the great state of Florida, where I hope to be a resident one day. Jeb Bush is with us. How are you, sir?
Hey, Sean, how are you doing?
Do you remember the day I nearly got arrested when I flew down to Tallahassee when you were governor and Rick Leventhal had handed me a knife, sort of like a bayonet knife from a soldier in Iraq, and I put it in my bag and forgot all about it, and it showed up on the screen and as I was being brought to your office, and I nearly got arrested?
I would have given you a pardon. Don't worry.
It was one of the most embarrassing moments in my life. The guy goes, well, there's a knife in this bag, and I said, I don't own a knife. And he pulls out, and then I'm like, oh, my goodness. And I remember going up and telling you, it was a pretty funny story. Where are you now with this process? A lot of people suspect that you're going to be making an announcement that you're getting in this 2016 race. Where are you in this process?
I'm nearing the end of a process of listening to a lot of people and been traveling around. I'm en route right now to Nevada and then to Arizona and Iowa for the next 4 or 5 days. And over the next month, I'll make a decision, and I hope that I'll move forward. But that decision hadn't been made yet.
Why would you want to be president? I mean, obviously you're thinking about it. What are the reasons that come to your mind that say, I would like to be the next president?
I think if we fix a few really big complex things, in my experience as governor, having cut taxes every year, shrunk the size of the workforce, eliminated affirmative action and replaced it with a leadership model that expanded opportunities for minority students, all these things make me believe that we can fix a few big things, and we have a lot of them. Our tax code, how we regulate, not embracing the energy revolution, a broken immigration system. There are a lot of things that aren't working right now, and if they did, this would be an extraordinary time. That's one thing. And the second is American leadership around the world. It's an issue that I think is going to become increasingly important as we see the unraveling of the world because of the lack of American leadership under this president and his former Secretary of State.
You know what I worry about the most, besides the national security issues, especially right now the Middle East, I think, is on fire, and American leadership is, we're missing in action at a time where we could really be providing some good leadership. But the next president of the United States is going to inherit $20 trillion in debt. Obama will have accumulated more debt than every other president before him combined. We're going to have $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. We have 93 million Americans out of the labor force, 54 million women, 40 consecutive months of 46 plus million Americans on food stamps, and almost 50 million Americans in poverty. That's almost 20 million more than when Obama became president. Those problems, to me, are overwhelming and daunting and sobering.
Yep, they are, except if you can look at it that way, end is near, and some people are increasingly pessimistic, or you can say that the untapped potential that could be unleashed onto the world with American entrepreneurialism and America that had a clear, transparent economic system and a president that led instead of pulling back, that kind of America, those numbers would be reversed pretty quick. I mean, I'm just totally confident that that's the case. I don't believe people are comfortable being dependent upon government. They want the right to rise. They want their spirits lifted. They want their children to have more opportunity. And so fixing these big economic problems will make us strong domestically, but it'll also give us more confidence to project America in the world as well to create a more secure world.
What would be the specific, maybe the top three specific things that you would do to reverse this trend of dependency, this trend of poverty, this trend of high deficits and debt?
We have to grow economically to reduce the debt. We can't raise taxes. We can't, we certainly can't spend our way to prosperity or tax our way to prosperity. The American economy has to grow at double the rate it's growing now. And if it did, we'd get ample resources to lessen the deficit, and demands on government would be replaced. And the middle's income would grow. I mean, if you're going to grow at 3.5% or 4% rather than this anemic 1.5% or 2%, you're going to have significant income growth for people to rise out of poverty, as well as the middle not being squeezed to the extent that they are now. And this really depressing percentage of people that are out of the workforce would grow. We could grow again and have jobs that would be with rising income instead of declining income, and there'd be a lot more job creation.
How big a part of the equation is, I, for example, like the penny plan. You cut a penny out of every dollar. That's the spending side of the equation. With baseline budgeting, we never cut anything. It's just reducing amounts of increase and increasing the deficit. So that's part of it for me. I think energy is probably the answer to all of our financial problems if we unleash the resources that we have in the country.
Absolutely. And we do. When you look at the amount of money that's wasted on fraud as it relates to food stamps, many of the programs, these stories keep coming out that there's a lot that you could do. And as governor, I got to do that. They call me Veto Corleone because I vetoed 2,000 separate items in the budget. We balanced our budgets every year. I left with close to $9 billion of reserves. We're the only state during my time as governor to become AAA bond rated. By the way, the United States government is now AA bond rated. Mm-hmm. Florida and a few other states do better in terms of creditworthiness than our own federal government.
I know that there has been a lot written, and I want to give you an opportunity to respond to this, questioning whether you are a true conservative. I want you to answer the question in this way. I went back and I looked before I interviewed you at CPAC, and I looked at your Florida record, and I thought it was a very conservative record. I want you to explain what your record is there, and then talk about the two issues that keep coming up, in your own words, immigration and Common Core.
Sure. So, look, every year I cut taxes as governor. Every year we reduced the government workforce to the tune of 13,000, more than 10% fewer government workers when I left. Every year we increased the amount of reserves that the state had. We started at around $1 billion, and we ended up close to $10 billion of reserves. And we challenged the trial lawyers, the teachers' unions, the people that were kind of, dumb, fat, and happy with a government that hadn't been reformed in a long while. And the net result was that we ended up with 1.3 million jobs created during my 8 years in the private sector, more than any other state other than California. And we led the nation during that time, 5 out of those 8 years. We created the first statewide voucher program. We had the greatest gains in learning. We had the most ambitious school choice programs. This was done because I was a conservative, but I did it joyfully. I didn't do it, I did it to benefit everybody, and the net result was that with a lot of trial and tribulation, whether it was on Second Amendment rights that Florida led the way or the pro-life issues that I had a chance to act on, in a purple state, I left with a 67% approval rating because people knew I had a heart for them, that I cared about them, that I was principled, and that I was a conservative, more conservative than the mainstream Floridian, by the way, but we were successful. And I think you can bring that to Washington, to forge consensus again, to fight for your core beliefs, but not do it in a way where it's always a loss for somebody and a win for somebody else. We got to get back to the Reagan-esque way of governing.
Let me ask specifically, because you mentioned that you were the first state that had vouchers. Every article that I read about you talks about Common Core. What is?
Yes.
And I think for most people, when I think about Common Core, I get nervous because it sounds like a top-down, Washington-led, run educational system. And I would argue that we need vouchers nationally, especially in inner cities in America. We have all this talent and all these poor-performing school districts and cities. And I think these kids are trapped because of an unholy alliance between the Democratic Party and liberals and the teachers' unions.
I completely agree and have advocated that. There are things the federal government can do to push power back to the states. Higher standards is what I'm for. I'm not for the federalization of standards, nor curriculum, nor content. It would be horrific to have a national school board, which is the terminology that people are fearful of. And what we need are higher standards that we assess accurately to assure that children are college and or career ready, because less than half of them are right now. And that is a tragedy that will unfold over and over again. We're not going to grow at 4% per year or 3.5% per year if young people can't read and write and calculate math and have a sense of purpose in their lives. And our education system has been so dumbed down, so politically correct, in its approach, that we have horrific results. And so
it doesn't sound like you're advocating.
I don't think the federal government should be involved in any of this.
I don't hear that you're describing Common Core as I read about it and hear how it's implemented. So is it fair to say that you're not really for Common Core? You're for districts and high standards? In other words, go ahead.
Well, I mean, every state that's implemented Common Core, if they don't like those standards, they should implement higher standards, higher than Common Core.
All right, let me ask you about.
There are 44 states that have implemented this. They did it voluntarily, and I don't think if you move back to the dumbed down standards, it would be a disaster for our country, and it would be a disaster for the children that aren't getting a quality education. So, if there are better standards, fine. what we ought to do is set higher expectations for all the next generation for us to be successful.
When any article that I read always brings up the issue of immigration and that, quote, you are at odds with conservatives on immigration, especially issues involving in-state tuition, driver's licenses. I know a lot of people have made a lot of the comment that you made of, quote, an act of love.
Yeah.
Let me. What is your immigration policy? Like, I would believe before we do anything, we've got to secure the borders first. That's my position.
Yeah.
What's yours?
We need to enforce the border. We need to control the border for sure. Legal immigration needs to be easier than illegal immigration, and there are times where that's not the case. We need to enforce the law as it relates to people coming legally and not staying. We need to have an e-verify system. All of that, there's broad agreement on. This president hasn't acted on it. We shouldn't have a president that signs executive orders that are not within his constitutional authority as it relates to allowing people to stay. All of those things are important, but we also need to fix our legal immigration system. Narrowing family petitioning and allowing for economic immigrants to come would be a catalyst for higher sustained growth. And then finally, Sean, as we talked about at CPAC, I believe that we need a path to earned legal status, where you pay a fine, where you get a provisional work permit, where you work, you don't receive government assistance from Washington, and over a period of time, you earn legal status. The other options are kind of hard to imagine how we go about doing them, to be honest with you.
Would you support securing the border first? Is that pivotal for you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely we have to do that, because you can't create another flow of people coming illegally if you want to reform the legal system. That was the problem of the 86 law or the 87 law whenever it passed. We have to control the border for sure.
What about?
I don't think we need to wait years and years and years, because what we need to do is grow our economy at a far faster rate than we're doing now, and we need young, dynamic, aspirational people to be part of that success.
Yeah. Would you rescind the executive order, which I agree with you? I think you said it was unconstitutional. Would you rescind that?
I would, and I would replace it with a comprehensive reform that dealt with these DREAM Act kids, not necessarily their parents. I haven't thought about that, but these kids that have come here through no fault of their own. Mm-hmm. There should be a different path for them than someone who crossed the border last year that doesn't have a family here. I mean, there has to be some practicality to our immigration laws, but first and foremost has to be enforcement for sure.
I want to get to one last question, because I know you're running out of time here. You gave an interview yesterday where the question of Iraq came up, and knowing what you know now, would you go in? And I've watched the media interpretation. You said yes, and so would Hillary. And I took that to mean based on, if it was the same moment with the same intelligence, would you do it based on that moment? The media seems to be taking it another way, and I wanted to see if I could clarify that today.
Yeah, I thank you, because I interpreted the question wrong, I guess. I was talking about, given what people knew then, would you have done it, rather than knowing what we know now. And knowing what we know now, clearly there were mistakes as it related to faulty intelligence in the lead up to the war and the lack of focus on security. My brothers admitted this, and we have to learn from that. But the simple fact is that in the last few years of my brother's presidency, the surge was quite effective to bring stability and security to Iraq, which was missing during the early days of the United States engagement there. And that security has been totally obliterated by the president's pulling out too early, and now these voids are filled by this barbaric asymmetric threat that endangers the entire region and the entire world. And so lessons learned. The United States needs to be engaged. We need to have the best intelligence in the world. We need to make sure that our friends know that we have their back. The best way to lessen the chance of having American boots on the ground is to have a foreign policy that is strong and secure and consistent.
So in other words, if in 2020 hindsight, you would make a different decision.
Yeah, I don't know what that decision would have been. That's a hypothetical, but the simple fact is mistakes were made, as they always are in life. This is not a informed policy. And so we need to learn from the past to make sure that we're strong and secure going forward.
All right, Governor, appreciate your time. I wish we had more, and hopefully we'll be seeing you out on the campaign trail. Look forward to any possible announcement. I think we've got a great slate of people running, and I think it's a great opportunity for the country to get on the right track again, which I hope for.
Thanks, Sean. We do have a group of great candidates, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
All right, appreciate it. Governor Jeb Bush on the Sean Hannity Show.